So we got some interesting podcast topics for today. I think we should just dive straight in. Why don't you start for us?
Awesome. Well, I've been having a lot of fun with this AI tool called Suno AI.
Okay.
And I heard about it because, Copilot recently introduced a plugin for it, and
Hmm.
everyone sort of started posting about it online. So I just went on their website, on the Suno.ai website,
Yeah.
and they give you like 50 credits just to start off with,
Okay.
which I guess is like 5 songs
Okay.
or
So it doesn't
five
equate to
prompts.
very much then.
No, it's interesting. I think for each prompt, it generates 2 songs. So
Okay.
technically, you get 10 songs, but yeah, five
Right.
prompts.
It's interesting with these AI models where everything's not behind a paywall yet. It's kind of like trying to tease you in, trying to get you to experiment. I think the fact that ChatGPT being so open and allowing everyone in with just a username and a login kind of sets the precedent. But if we're going to have more and more of these tools that are working off an API but behind a paywall, how do you feel about that? Do you think AI should be free and open, or do you think it should be people have to earn a living, right?
Yeah, no, it's a good point. I think that everyone's still trying to figure out what that commercial model looks like. For
Mm,
enterprise, it's more straightforward, right? You can have a subscription fee. You can have some sort of corporate license, and you can say, right, your data is not going to be used for anything else. You can give some privileges, benefits. When it comes to the consumer market, I think it does seem more tricky. And I think this £20 a month or $20 a month type subscription fee that most of these services have kind of sort of at the moment settled on seems to
mm,
be a good place for it. But yeah, it's an interesting question because it costs a lot of money to train these systems, so you
yeah.
can't really make it free.
No.
But how do you monetize it correctly? It's an interesting topic.
Do you feel like AI is going to become the next streaming service though, where you've got your Disney, your Netflix, your Amazon, your Prime? I mean, at the moment, I'm leeching off at least a couple of family members to pay for some of those
Mhm.
accounts. But are we going to get to a point where you have to have loads of AI subscriptions to be able to function?
It's a good one because if you think about the direction where OpenAI are headed, they're
Mm,
planning to launch the GPT store early next year.
okay.
And the goal there is that you've got these specific sort of, you could say, versions of ChatGPT that are tailored to do a specific task and
Mm,
have access to maybe separate, even proprietary knowledge bases in certain instances. So it almost feels like you're paying the premium ChatGPT subscription, which is what, £20 a month. And then you have to pay an additional fee to get access to those GPTs. I believe you will have to pay for them. They're
right.
not included in the subscription. Whereas I think with like Copilot, they've got these plugins, which at the moment ChatGPT also has. And
Yes.
again, I was talking about Suno. That's how like Copilot introducing that into their ecosystem
Hmm.
seemed to give this other company Suno a huge boost in sort of clicks. So
Yes.
I think everyone's kind of playing around with the idea where you pay them a subscription amount and you get access to all of these tools. But
Yeah.
I think I'm not quite sure where it's going to settle. I can imagine Adobe integrating AI into all of their suite already, right? And so you're just paying the standard subscription and you've already got access to a range of AI tools.
It does feel like we may end up with these kind of aggregators. So your Copilots, your Adobes. Canva is a great example. So Canva has lots of AI apps that are kind of integrated that are third party, but you can access and utilize without even creating an account. But if you want to go to that individual app on an individual basis, you have to sign up, you have to create an account. In some cases, you may even have to pay. Whereas with Canva, you can just click into their search function, find the app that's relevant, put in the prompt, and then it will create that AI piece for you. But yeah, maybe we're going to end up with these like aggregators that are going to bring the services
Yeah.
together.
And you'd imagine it's only going to get cheaper as technology improves. But I think the end goal of this is to make access to intelligence more cost effective, or turn intelligence into like a commodity. So
Yeah,
using these tools, everything's going to have intelligence embedded in it. So how do
yeah,
you price that? I don't know,
it's
but
going to be
it's
interesting,
definitely
right?
going to be more cost effective than it is today.
Let's loop back to Sono because I've deviated well off topic.
Well, no, that was interesting. No, so I think so no, so like I said, you get the 50 credits. I don't actually know how much credits cost because I've only used 20 credits and I've got
Mhm.
30 left still. And I'm trying to think of good ideas to sort of put in as prompts. But the first one I tried was I just asked it to write a acoustic pop song about working from home. I don't know, it
Okay.
just came into my head. I thought this is a random one. Let me try it,
That feels
and
very
it, again, it
depressing.
spat out two results. It's actually pretty good. I'll send it to you afterwards.
Okay.
It gave me two results, and one of them was more sort of acoustic, singer songwriter style,
Right.
laid back song. The other one was a bit more generic. It was kind of like you got loud music.
Okay.
It didn't really feel like an acoustic pop song. But what I wasn't pretty amazed by was the lyrics and the vocals that go with the lyrics.
Right.
It's still very auto-tuny, but
Mm.
I feel like it kind of worked well. And I got like an interesting output. Like it was talking about, working from home where the coffee is always warm. You don't have to worry about traffic. So it was very sort of, it was an interesting, funny sort of song. And the
Yeah.
second one I tried, I asked Myra for a prompt,
Okay.
and she said, a song that demonstrates my love for pancakes because she
Right.
loves pancakes.
Okay. What
And
kind of
that was also
pancakes,
an
first of all,
interesting
though?
one.
Are we talking American pancakes? Are we talking crepes? Like an
I think
English pancake day
everything.
pancake?
Everything, but pancake day pancake as well. But
Okay.
she just loves pancakes. So she's a sweet tooth. So yeah. So I put that prompt in, and the result was actually like relatively good. It was kind of like this catchy, I think I sent that one to you, right? The
Yeah.
sort of it
Yeah, I had to
sounded like
listen to it
one
on
of those.
WhatsApp. It sounded a little
Yeah,
bit like the Jonas Brothers kind of break off. So I think it's like Cake by the Ocean. That was it. Cake by the Ocean. It was very like auto-tuned, but it was interesting, like a synthesized voice. So I didn't realize these tools had got to the point where we were able to synthesize voices, not just synthesize instruments.
yeah, I agree. And I think it's, and realizing that, these tools are still in their infancy. I mean, if you look at how far the image generation tools have come, it just come along in just the past year,
Yeah.
where, there were some good results. Then you got these photorealistic pictures, but the fingers would always be messed up. And
Yeah.
now you get pretty good fingers as well. Apparently, they have still trouble drawing cigarettes. Apparently, it's
Oh, there
called a
was
cigarette test.
some deeply horrifying images of hands. I think it's what's so unique about photography or human illustration. Hands are so complicated, right? So if you think about any kind of object, so like an apple, a balloon, a bat, they tend to be fixed. They don't change forms and shapes. Think about just the simple bones in your fingers and how much they can adapt and shape. It's no wonder that an AI struggles to be able to replicate what a hand should look like, because there's probably an infinite amount of ways that you can position a hand. So that is a
Yeah.
real challenge.
Lots of different configurations, and like you might have fingers hidden so you only see one finger at a time, and
Yeah.
nailing all of that. But I mean, they've come a far way. I mean, the images that are generated today are pretty good, and they do get the hands a lot better than they did before.
Right.
So just, I think, translating that to creation of music and songs, you know, seeing where the technology is today, I would be surprised if by next year this time you don't have more realistic vocals that don't really sound like auto tune, and
Right.
maybe even have a bit more sort of flair and sort of uniqueness
Mm,
to them. Just as like with these image generation tools, you get people who look really like people, like that could
mm,
be someone. And there's nothing generic about the face. It's got its own set of features, and it looks like a real person's face.
yeah.
It's just that it is actually generated. So I think it'll be interesting to see how kind of the music industry takes on
Mm.
these tools, or maybe fights against it, and
Okay.
sort of what sort of impact it has.
So with the tool, do you get the option to kind of put in a prompt around how you want it to emotionally make you feel? Because I think that's really what songs are about, right? And connection emotionally.
So you can say like you want a happy song, a sad song, exciting song. You can specify what sort of genre you want it to fall into. And you can even sort of upload your own lyrics. So you can
Mm,
upload your own lyrics and ask it to sort of write a happy song with, maybe some acoustic or synth sounds using these lyrics, and it'll sort of do that. So I haven't, like I said, because I've only tried two prompts, so I'm being careful with my credits.
yeah.
I haven't gone into that in depth, but there are a lot of examples online, on
Yeah.
X. Like if you look them up, lots of sort of interesting things that people are trying.
In terms of kind of like the emotional piece, I think it's going to be interesting how emotion gets conveyed by an AI. I think it's a conversation that we've talked about off air, but in terms of how can an AI understand the intrinsic emotion that a song is trying to convey? So how I feel about a song can be very different to how the artist feels about a song compared to how my friends feel about that song and how my family would feel about it. So emotion is not necessarily a defined piece. So, for instance, in Spotify, if you were trying to tag the emotion of that song, how would you do that? Because it would be based on the listener's personal opinion. It's a little bit like genres and how those are tagged in different music services. So, um, Spotify may tag a piece as classic rock. For me, in my Spotify Wrapped, it's tagged Bastille as classic rock, which to me is absolutely not the right genre. I'd probably maybe class them in the indie category, but that would be a subjective genre choice, or maybe it's chosen by the artist themselves, or by the beats per minute, or something along those lines. But can an AI be just from data be able to process a genre or an emotion, a feeling that that piece should be able to convey? And do we think that the data would be able to show that?
It's a good question because also, even as a human sort of annotator, can you annotate or add metadata to these songs accurately? Because if you're in
Mm,
a happy mood, even a sort of slightly mellow song might sound happy to you.
yeah.
If you take lyrics out of the equation for a second, if it's just music, you might say, "Oh, this is actually a happy piece of music." And
Mm,
I think that line between is it happy, is it sad, can be sort of very blurred, right?
right.
And I think we sometimes, our we kind of project our mood on whatever we're listening to.
Yeah.
So again, depending on what you're feeling at the moment or what you've just done, you might tag a song slightly differently.
Yeah.
So I think there's a bit of sort of what's the word I'm looking for? There's a little bit of sort of vagueness there, right?
Mm,
Like how do you actually classify a song? And I think that would probably get translated to whatever AI model that's been trained because
sure.
the training data, if it's annotated by humans, is only going to be as good as human annotated data.
Of course.
So it's just going to learn that, and I mean, the idea is generally if you ask someone else, hey, can you play a happy song? They'll play something that might not be the happy song that you've chosen,
Yeah.
but at least it might not be a very, depressing, sad, sort of mellow song.
Completely.
They'd
Yeah.
understand happy. They might sort of translate it as sort of being upbeat,
Yeah.
something, or they might pay attention to lyrics instead, and
Mm.
something that's more positive, sort of like a Jason Mraz style sort of song.
Great choice.
Um, and I think, yeah, so I think if that's in the training data, I think they'll get translated to an AI. But
Okay.
yeah, I think the final thought on that is the goal with all of this is the AI is able to do these tasks almost as good as almost as well as a human would.
Right.
But when you say that, it would also do it as poorly as a human would,
Of course. Yeah.
because it's using human data to train on. I mean, the other interesting thing there is, you know, sort of speaking about copyright,
Mm,
there's a lot of sort of controversy right now about these models being trained on sort of copyright material. Is that
right.
infringement? And I think Getty Images is suing Stability AI, who've got the
Okay.
Stable Diffusion model that apparently allegedly was trained on their images
Right.
without their permission.
Okay.
Interestingly, I think what's happened is they've asked Getty Images to provide examples,
Right.
specific examples of images that they think it's been trained on, which is
Okay.
almost impossible to produce
Of course.
because
Yeah.
you don't know what it's been trained on. So, I mean, I just wanted to get your thoughts. Like, where do you stand, or how do you feel about, photographs you take or content that you've created? If there's an AI model that's being trained on it without your permission, what's your sort of feeling around this?
I think it's a really interesting one. I think if you steal from one source, then you're a criminal. If you steal from many sources, then you're taking inspiration. So it would be, how closely does this match? Is this a mimic of my work, or is this inspired by many people? Because let's be honest, as humans, everything that we do is based on experiences and things that we've seen, heard, tasted. All of those things come together and combine to create our taste and our style and the way that we create, I suppose. So as a photographer, would I feel sad about someone using my imagery as inspiration? No. But would I feel upset if it was a direct copy with a slight edit or a slight change? Yes, I probably would. So it's an interesting one. So Getty obviously are not particularly happy about the use in this case, but Adobe are using their stock imagery portfolio to train their AI models. So in Photoshop, where you can use AI to generate different imagery, that's coming from Photoshop's files, as well as from, I believe, again, it's kind of public domain imagery that is usable by anyone. So it's an interesting one. Does the value of Adobe stock go down because everyone can now basically take from that source and create exactly what they want to create? Possibly, but it's an interesting one, I suppose. What do you think?
Well, I think you kind of touched upon two sort of facets to this, right? One is to do with the output. So, if and you mentioned with your photograph, right? If you had a model that was spitting out photographs that were like for what you created,
Hmm.
then you could say, look, it's infringing upon my copyright. This is my photograph.
Yeah.
It's just recreated the same thing. And it's almost like, if you like Adele, you can't just copy her song
No.
and sing it with that music and just release it.
Mm.
What you could do is you could write your own songs that
Yes.
you would imagine Adele might write
Hmm.
and sing it in her style. So you're kind of inspired by her, but you're
Of
not
course.
copying her. And I think that's where the challenge is with some of these lawsuits, where the output from the AI does not necessarily resemble the input one to one.
Yeah.
I think what they're upset about is it's my images, or I own these images.
Yeah.
If I want to train a model tomorrow, that value is suddenly gone down because you already trained a model on my images.
Of
So if I
course.
was
Yeah.
to invest and train a model, no one's going to want to use it because this is already out there. So it's almost like, is it, it's a bit sort of, the whole thing's kind of been confused a little bit, because when people say copyright infringement, you assume, oh, so these AI models are sort of copying what they're
Yes.
trained on. Not necessarily. The output can look different, but they're obviously been trained on it. And I think it's a tricky one for me because, again, I always like to think about, like, where are we headed? So with all of this, if you look at OpenAI, the goal is to be able to create safe sort of, artificial general intelligence, so AGI,
Yes.
which could be defined as like human level intelligence, or even beyond human level intelligence. But if you look at how we learn, we're being trained on copyright material all the time. I mean, the music we
Exactly.
listen to, that we get inspired by, the movies that we watch that might inspire us to record something or create something,
Yeah.
it's all copyrighted, but we're allowed to learn from it,
Of course. Yeah.
and create it. So I kind of feel like maybe it should be the same with these AI models. Train it on whatever you want that's available, as
Yeah.
long as the output, is not essentially copying the input.
Casey Neistat recently in an interview with Stephen Bartlett was talking about people kind of copying his work across YouTube. And I thought that was quite an interesting one. So this is before AI becomes a common tool that anyone can utilize. So Casey Neistat is kind of seen as the king of YouTube. He's the original content creator with this very unique style. That's been adopted quite heavily across YouTube, and you'll see so many content creators that have the exact same style. But what he was kind of saying was his style was developed based on necessity, not based on being influenced too heavily. Now, obviously, he had influence over that period, but he was talking about the reason he started creating short videos in the first place was because he has a hard drive, or at the time had a hard drive that was only capable of producing a video that was like, I think it was like 10 gigabytes or something like that. So he couldn't go any further than that amount of storage. And then everything was just based on like what camera he actually had available. He couldn't afford a better camera, so he shot on that type of camera. He had like a limited amount of time to produce a video, so he had to produce videos in the time that he had, and that kind of created this style of vlogging that we now know today as vlogging, but really was just his necessity. So I guess
Yeah.
kind of linking back to AI, it's it's easy to copy, but it's different. It's difficult to be unique. And uniqueness really comes from necessity. Like, what do you actually have access to as a creator? A while back in our conversation, you were talking about the song that you got created about working from home, right? So,
Yeah.
how did that song come out?
I thought it was a good song. I mean, it wasn't something I would necessarily listen to.
Hmm.
I'd probably listen to that Pancake one a bit more because it's it's just cringy how how it's put together. But I can imagine every time we're preparing pancakes, just play that on loop in the background. But the work from home one was decent. Yeah.
The reason I ask is because I often think about what the office of the future looks like, and I've got quite deep into the metaverse. I've really enjoyed the Meta Quest, and I can see how kind of Horizon workrooms could be a beginning entry into a virtual workplace. But I'm really interested in people's opinions, and I ask people this all the time. What do you think the office of the future looks like? Because we talk about how cities are kind of carbon copies of each other these days. So you could go from one city to another, and realistically, it'll be the same grey buildings, the same grid structure. It will have the same Starbucks coffee shop and the same McDonald's. There's very little difference between the cities that we build because of globalization. Everything almost becomes quite standardized. So we kind of at this point where we have people that still are doing these large commutes. So it may be an hour to work, it may be 2 hours on the train, and when we get to a point where where we do have a metaverse office that's actually usable, that doesn't make you feel sick, that you can spend a long time in, that's lightweight on the head, that has a long battery life, all of those sorts of things, what do you think that's going to look like? Do you think that you just sit at home, you plug in, and you have some kind of machine that allows you to move around? Do you think that you'll kind of commute to a central place in your local city? A little bit like these kind of shared offices. Could you go through the door of this shared office, go to your booth, plug in, and suddenly you're in your headquarters of this global office with thousands of employees all around the world, but all in totally different geographies? What do you think that could work like?
It's interesting because I think, as far as I know about where the technology is, you can have a virtual experience, but you still need some sort of tactile feedback, right? You need a
Mm.
chair, you need tables. Ideally, you want a keyboard,
Yeah.
because even if it projects one, you don't get that tactile feedback.
Hmm.
So I imagine you could have a setup at your home, and that's sort of enhanced by having sort of the goggles on. So suddenly, you've got these massive monitors you can use. Maybe you can even see your other colleagues around you, so
Yeah.
it feels like you're in the office. But it's sort of overlaying that. There's a pass through where you're seeing real images, which is where a lot of these products are kind of, I think, headed, the direction they're kind of headed in at the moment. So you still got your own keyboard, your own laptop. The
Yeah.
rest of it is virtual. But I think what's more interesting is this feels like an opportunity for businesses to almost reinvent what an office space could look like.
Yeah.
I mean, we've all heard about experiments of, like, how the Google office is so different from other offices,
Yeah.
more sort of hip and stylish and things.
Hmm.
But I just
Slides,
thinking
ball
about what
pits,
you
that
could
kind of thing.
do in a virtual, yeah, I mean, in a virtual reality, I mean, I don't even know what you could do. There's so many possibilities,
Yeah.
but you could have very exciting environments, with things to do in, in the breaks that you take,
Yeah.
in between work, different ways to sort of socialize with your
Mm.
colleagues. And I think just the environment that it's projecting, right? Because there's so much more control.
Yeah.
You don't need to repaint the office walls. You don't need to decorate the office if it's Christmas.
Yeah.
It can all be done virtually. But I think it could be very interesting.
So you walk into a Google office and it has a feel, it has lots of exciting features. But if you walk into a standard office, it obviously there is maybe more cubicle based and it's like the plain white walls, that sort of thing. But if everyone could do it and there was a kind of a low barrier to entry, would it feel as exciting knowing that your amazing, exciting office is exactly the same as everyone else's amazing, exciting office? I mean, I guess you just have to continue to push the boundaries of what's possible. So you're always at the kind of the cutting edge of excitement. But there's only so many ways that you can make an experience exciting, but also a work environment, right? Or is there maybe this is kind of an infinite path where we keep innovating what gets people excited so that each business is kind of vying for the latest talent?
Yeah, I think to me it's less about making it exciting for, like, just for the sake of making it exciting. I'm sure there's a lot of companies out there that will just disagree and be like, there should be no excitement in the office.
Hmm.
It should be all very straightforward and simple, which
Yeah.
is fair enough.
Roller coaster
But I
2 days.
imagine it's more. Yeah, yeah. But I imagine, it depends, if you're like if you're a company that focuses on a specific market, maybe you want to bring some of that into the office so you
Yeah.
kind of feel closer. Even if you're someone who's just doing accounting, for example, you feel closer to the product you're creating, so
Hmm.
or the product that the company's creating. So you have that sort of environment around you that makes you feel like you're part of this world
Yeah.
now. So
Mm.
maybe you can do more creative and interesting things as a company,
Yeah.
and reduce some of the more sort of, I would say, menial and repetitive parts of the workplace.
Yeah.
And if you're looking at this whole sort of VR or cross reality um, environment, there's so much intelligence that can be given to you in that, right? Like,
Hmm.
like Tony Stark's heads up display, Jarvis,
Yeah.
you're getting all this information in front of you, you know what you're looking at, and it can help you do that, even if it's a physical task. So you're in a factory or you're in a hospital,
Yeah.
you've got a patient in front of you, and you've got these glasses on, and you're getting all of this information about the patient, about the sort of metrics, what to look at, what to do. All of this assistance is being brought to you by the AI that's
Yeah.
powering it. So I think it's a very interesting future we've got ahead of us.
Well, I'm looking forward to being the next Iron Man. I think that could be good fun. So,
You know what made me really think about that was, I don't know if you saw Google when Google announced Gemini
yeah.
a couple of weeks back now. I think they released this video that sort of went viral everywhere,
Okay.
which was like it was less of a demo video. I would say it's more of like a marketing video,
Yeah.
but it was this sort of multimodal concept where you had someone in front of a camera, they were sort of drawing something,
Yeah.
and Gemini would sort of speak to the person, answer questions or tell it what the person's drawing, and sort of interact, and it felt like this really fluid multimodal interaction where you're speaking to the AI, you're also showing, or the AI can see what you're seeing,
Okay.
so it can sort of take that context in when responding. I really think that's the direction we're headed in, because I use ChatGPT on my phone quite a bit, and
Hmm.
again, you can take photographs, show it photos, ask it things. You can speak to it. It does have a, an interface where you can actually say something. It'll respond back.
Yeah.
So I think we're getting there, but what's missing is it's not in your glasses yet. I think that would really be what would, I think, make it mainstream.
I think you're probably right, and I mean Zuckerberg is definitely heading in that direction with the Ray-Ban Facebook Meta glasses. So, do I want to get to a point where I mean Google was kind of on that path many years ago with the Google Glass? Was it Google Glass?
Yeah, I think they
Um,
call it Google Glasses.
that's it. So, do I want to get to a point where everything I do can be interpreted by an AI and it's kind of using me as a data source? Maybe. It depends on whether that adds value to me, and it's all about how much we trust the technology, right? So if we're building technology that can be trusted, then potentially it's an easy adoption. Everyone's going to have a different level of trust, and I think we're still in the early days of what people feel comfortable with. I think definitely different generations see AI in a totally different remit. So I was watching a video again about how ChatGPT had this kind of like down period not too long after launch. So obviously, this huge surge of users and interactions when the platform launched. But during kind of this summer period, it just started taking a bit of a dip. And people thought, well, that's it. Like the interest is gone. People weren't actually that interested in the long term. Actually, what happened was the school kids went on holiday and suddenly they didn't need to be using AI to create their homework. And that kind of really was reflected in the data. You can literally see this kind of spike and dip. And it really shows how education is really being shaped by AI now. You've got this point where these tools are influencing maybe younger minds, but also being kind of adopted at a much faster speed than maybe traditionally it is being used in business or in other areas. So I think we're going to start seeing how, and it doesn't necessarily need to be generations, but how different mindsets are going to be utilizing and changing their comfort level with these new technologies and new AI technologies at very different speeds, I think.
At one point, I did want to touch upon that you mentioned around sort of, I guess it touches upon the like the privacy aspect of having AI built into like your your glasses or your phone and all of that. And I think what was interesting was, Apple always seems to have a focus on privacy or security. Whenever they release a new feature, they'll do it in a way and
Hmm.
they really advertise how this one thing they've done differently that makes them sort of conserve your privacy more than the competition.
Right.
And it was interesting because they released a paper recently that focused on, well, the point, what the paper showed was this new technique or a combination of techniques that
Hmm.
you can use to run these large language models locally
Okay.
on like a edge device or like a phone.
Right.
But what they did was what the techniques did was they allowed the device to run a model that's almost twice the size that it would traditionally be able to run. I hope I'm able to explain that correctly. So, if your phone only has, like 8 gigs of RAM
Yeah.
and you can only run a model up to that, it needs 8 gigs of memory.
Hmm.
With this sort of technique, you could potentially run a model that needs up to 16 gigs of memory.
Okay.
And they've introduced some techniques to enable you to do that.
Yeah.
And I thought that was interesting because that's like, I feel like that's the first thing Apple has kind of put out there in
Yeah.
terms of these, Gen AI and large language models. And I have a feeling that the direction they might be headed in is that, look, any other model you use is running in the cloud. All your
Yes.
data is going to the cloud. So obviously you need some sort of connection or cloud connectivity, but also it means you're not in control of your data. And maybe what they might introduce is that the way that they've implemented it is that all or most of it is going to be done locally on your device. So anytime whatever they call their AI is looking at your data or analyzing something,
Hmm.
it's actually doing it on the device,
Yeah.
and then that data never actually goes to the cloud to be reused. There might still be some compute they do on the cloud, so it might be like a hybrid situation. But I have a feeling that the direction Apple's headed in is to do with sort of privacy.
Yeah.
And given that their Apple Vision Pro glasses come out, I think next year,
Yes.
early next year, um, it'd be interesting to see if they've worked on putting something in there which they haven't spoken about.
Yeah, you make a really interesting case. I think privacy and security is definitely going to be the hot topic in the future. And right now, it's definitely the top of everyone's mind. So it's going to be interesting to see where our comfort zones adapt, and how quickly we get used to this technology being potentially what we currently see as invasive. So definitely one to watch. We're 100% going to be catching up on this a lot in the future. So yeah, I think that's a good place for us to stop there.
Awesome. It's been a pleasure. Until next time.